and welcome to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's DIF, an online interactive event series that aims to shift mindsets and inspire stories and action towards the circular economy by sharing really great ideas from around the world. I'm Sarah O'Carroll, the Governments and Cities Network Manager here at the Foundation, and I'll be the host for this session. I'm delighted to introduce Carrie Ann Frericks from Circular Fashion Los Angeles, who's going to be facilitating today, helping us to understand more about what Los Angeles is doing to make fashion circular in its city. I also just want to remind you before I officially kick things off and hand over to Carrie that this is an interactive online event, and we encourage you to post your comments and questions in the comments box on the right-hand side of the DIF page. And we're also on Twitter. Please use the hashtag ThinkDIF if you want to interact with us as we go along. So Carrie, I'm really excited about today. I know that there's lots of exciting things happening in the circular economy space in Los Angeles, and particularly in fashion. I'm assuming that's why you wanted to host today's session.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Los Angeles, we have such a great, diverse fashion industry here. I'm really excited about our panelists who are here. And yeah, the whole point of my conversation today was just to talk more about what a circular economy, a circular fashion economy can look like in Los Angeles and where we're at with that. And so I have with me on the call, and I'm very thankful to have each of you here, Andy Schrader is the environmental policy lead for one of the city council members who is on the Environmental Justice Committee, and also one of the kind of key city council members leading waste management in the city, Paul Koretz. And so Andy is here from his office. And then we also have Clay McCarter here too. He is a legislative analyst for the city of Los Angeles, and he actually just finished about a month or two ago authoring a report on the state of the fashion industry in Los Angeles from an economic standpoint, and you know, looking to bring in like sustainability into that also, and how the city of Los Angeles can incentivize its fashion industries. So very excited to have Clay on the line too. And then not from Los Angeles, but Hilda is joining us from the Netherlands. And I asked Hilda to be on the call. She is the circular textiles lead for Circle Economy, and also is head of the Fiber Sort project. And I just really wanted a bona fide expert in circular textiles on the call with us to help, you know, share best practices and, you know, just some ways that cities can be more green. So that's why we have Hilda from the Netherlands, and I know it's late there, so thanks for being on with us. So I just wanted to see maybe if each of you wanted to say a couple sentences about why you wanted to join on the call and why you're here. Maybe Andy, we could start with you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for hosting this, and really excited to have this conversation. I started working with Councilmember Paul Koretz about 7 years ago on single-use plastic bags on that issue. And you know, as we got into just the single-use plastics issue, it's such a wormhole that goes into such a larger conversation. And Councilmember Koretz is one of the authors of the city's Zero Waste Initiative, which has gone into effect a couple years ago, requiring all our commercial waste collectors to have standards as far as the amount of recycling that they collect, the amount of organics that they collect, which will be starting in a couple of years. And so we've really been looking at the overall system and how do we fix the whole system. We've got it incentivized the wrong way, and I'm looking forward to this conversation about textiles.
Thank you. And single-use plastic bags are a big problem in fashion because every single piece of those clothing gets shipped in a single-use poly bag. So Clay, do you want to tell us a little bit about your report and your expertise?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Carrie. I'm Clay McCarter with the Chief Legislative Analyst's Office, advising the City Council on the fashion industry, among a bunch of other responsibilities. But I just finished a report on the industry that looked at the economy of the industry, number of jobs, the wage growth, how the industry is performing. And as I've done my research, I've learned that sustainability does play a major role in the industry. And LA is constantly competing with other cities to be a fashion leader. And I think that this is a great opportunity to learn more about how LA could be the nation's fashion sustainability champion. So really glad to be here.
Awesome, thank you. And then Hilda from the Netherlands joining us. Super excited to have you on the call. Thank you. Can you tell us about what you're doing?
Yes, so I'm Hilda van Duin. I work at Circle Economy. It's not-for-profit based in Amsterdam. We have a program specifically about textiles. I'm, by the way, not the program lead, but I'm a project manager within the program. And I am the project manager for the Fiber Sort project, which is a European funded initiative to ensure that there's the right infrastructure to turn all these used non-rewearable textiles into new materials. I'm very happy to be on this call because I know that cities play a pivotal role, or could play a pivotal role in creating this circular textiles loop, you could say. We actually published today our policy recommendations for regional, national, and the European government. So I'm very excited to be here today.
Excellent. And your policy recommendations are for the European Union, but of course that can, be parallel.
You should apply them in every country in the world.
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk about those. So should we jump into our questions? I think we can do that. So I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about LA introduced its Green New Deal. The mayor and his office introduced LA's Green New Deal in April 2019. It was a follow-up from the sustainability plan by the city that was introduced in 2015. And when I read this plan, it's like 153 pages. It has 445 initiatives in it. And in all of that, there was literally like 2 sentences in there regarding the fashion industry and what can be done about that. And the 2 goals were, number 1, to engage in liaison with the industry to implement zero waste manufacturing strategies. And then the second being to divert unwanted clothing from landfill. And that is, of course, a huge systemic problem in every city, from consumer clothing to the production waste of scraps and clothing to just beyond the fashion industry and beyond clothing. There's just so many textiles out there, hospitals, hotels, restaurants, etc. It's an enormous problem. And a city like Los Angeles with 4 million people would have tons of textiles to manage every single week. Putting a diverting clothing from landfill goal into place. And it was those kind of 2 sentences in the LA Green New Deal that kind of brought me back into the fashion industry after taking my own little hiatus in a different career. But there's just so much opportunity with fashion and with sustainability, and in such a tech innovative hub like Los Angeles that, there's just an amazing amount of opportunities. So I wanted to dig in quickly to start into the report that Clay wrote to kind of tell us about like the industry of Los Angeles' fashion industry as a whole, how it's doing, how big it is. I know you saw different types of businesses that were growing and different types of businesses that were shrinking. So I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about your findings and key findings. In that
Sure,
report.
thanks, Carrie. Yeah, so when we studied the fashion industry, we were focusing on the designers, the manufacturers, the wholesalers, and the suppliers. We left out all of the fashion retailers. But just looking at that subset, we found that there's over 11,000 businesses in the city. And that industry employs over 38,000 people. And looking at the employment numbers, employment has actually grown and is up 17% from 2014 to 2018. And also looking at the wages are up 14% from 2014 to 2017. So this report was brought about because the council was just concerned because the industry plays a major role in the city. Most of the industry is in downtown Los Angeles in our fashion district. And there was some concerns that the industry might be struggling. So it was nice to find that the industry is growing, but there are some challenges, which I can get to in a little bit. Looking at the largest job gainers, so the common consensus was that manufacturing is struggling, but we found by looking at the numbers, it depends on what kind of manufacturing you're involved in. We actually saw the largest job gain in the women's, girls, and infants cut and sew apparel manufacturing sector, but the biggest loss in the textile and fabric finishing mills sector. So the manufacturing industry is both growing and retracting. It just depends on the specific manufacturing role that you're in, which is where we've seen the numbers move. So looking at manufacturing as a whole, that field gained a net 580 jobs over that 4-year period. So we love to see more. And it's definitely a challenge, but I can think the good news and the silver lining is the industry is not shrinking, it's growing.
Yeah, that I can attest to that too. I've manufactured a brand here locally, front to back in Los Angeles, and I can attest to the factories that are cut and sew. We do have a lot of those, but the services pre-cut and sew, the textiles, the dye houses, the wash houses, and even the textile mills. It's so crucial that those remain here in Los Angeles in order to have that thriving business. It's more than just the cut and sew. You have to have all those services to pre-wash your garments, dye your garments, etc., to keep the industry going and thriving here. So Andy, I wanted to ask, because I know that there's a recycling motion that the City Council put forth to rethink basically all of LA's recycling infrastructure in the wake of the China ban on not taking our recyclables. So I kind of wanted to ask, in general, where we're at on that, where the city's at on that, what the appetite is for the city to just kind of build infrastructure or think about, how we are rethinking the whole recycling infrastructure and waste management in the city, because textiles is such a big part of that.
Sure. So as many of you may know, China has moved forward with their China National Sword policy, which essentially has gutted the recycling systems for most of the cities, if not all the cities in the country. What the National Sword policy says is don't send us your plastics unless they're absolutely pristine and clean, which I think is totally appropriate. The system that we had in place before was a system where we would use our natural resources, our natural gas, our oil, and create single-use plastics. We'd use them once, maybe twice, throw them into the recycling bin, feel good about it, and then send them on a big ship emitting lots of greenhouse gases across to China, where they and children and underpaid workers would dig through, pull things out. Anything that was contaminated with food waste, they would throw into rivers. And this is something that's just coming out recently. A lot of the giant plastic gyres that they talk about in the oceans are coming from these rivers in Asia, where beside villages, where they take out the recycling that they can't use, the plastics they can't use, and just throw them into the river. So the system was really broken and set up to just offload all of our externalities. And so this really gives us an opportunity to rethink our entire waste system. Everybody is pretty freaked out about it, honestly, from the city level. There are a couple of state bills to redesign our entire plastics recycling system, which I hope get approved in a few months up in Sacramento. But in the meantime, we really need to look at how do we manufacture things here in LA County, and reuse them here in LA County. One of the things that we've been talking about, we've got Councilmember Koretz is the author of a climate emergency mobilization office, the first one in the world. And the vision of that office is to really relook at everything that we're doing, how we do it. And in this realm, we've got something we're calling the green sword policy, where if we can, one of the tenants, a couple of the tenants under the climate emergency office are, we're going to need a whole bunch of solar panels. We're going to need a whole bunch of heat pumps. How do we incentivize companies to make them here in LA County? And if they're going to make them, we're going to need certain materials to create the solar panels and the heat pumps. So how can we prioritize those specific materials in our waste stream? So we pull them out, give them to the appropriate manufacturers, create the solar panels right here in Southern California, create the heat pumps right here in Southern California, create good green jobs, and then use and install those solar panels and heat pumps here in Southern California. So instead of this economy where we're sending things all over the world, we're just doing it right here in Los Angeles, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, which, as we know, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has given us last year about 12 years to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by half. And, now we have 11 years. I think that's generous. I think we have about 5 years, if that. So we really need to rethink how we do everything, and including our textiles. Textiles get into the landfill, create methane gas. Methane is one of the worst greenhouse gas emissions in the short term, and we need to keep it out of the landfill. So there's got to be a way to reuse and create that sort of circular economy here in Los Angeles. And Councilmember Koretz is interested in doing that, which is why I'm here today.
Awesome. And I think that's a perfect segue to bring Hilda into the conversation, especially with fiber sort, because the recycling, there's infinite number of steps. There's 5 big major steps, but each step has so many steps within it, from collecting, then you have to sort it, then you have to kind of get it ready for the recycling process, then the actual chemical or mechanical recycling process, and then getting all of that right back into the supply chain, like you mentioned. So Hilda, can you talk about that a little bit? Because you've actually launched a textile recycling program in your home city of Rotterdam, and taking those lessons and everything you're doing in circular economy and with the fiber sort project. Just talk a little bit about that recycling process and what that takes and challenges.
Yeah, sure. So I really love the saying of we've been offloading our externalities in other sectors, and I'm afraid I have some bad news and envy, because the same is happening indeed in textiles. But the good news is there are quite some cities actually that took action on textiles already. So I hope I have some interesting thoughts for you maybe to take along. So first, what I wanted to say, it's not about recycling of textiles. That should never be the aim in itself. It's about the valorization of used textiles. Recycling is only the last resort for textiles if really we cannot reuse the textiles, we can't repair them, or we cannot remanufacture them. So just maybe in that context, even if I have an initiative in my hometown, indeed in Rotterdam, to recycle textiles, I really see it as the last resort. So let's first assess, and I think also for cities, this is quite interesting, to look at the infrastructure that you already have in place to collect these textiles in the right way, so to ensure that they are clean and that you can actually reuse them if possible. So first to collect them, then sort the rewearables, so separate the rewearables from the non-rewearables, where I often get lost in translation with other people, because non-rewearables, that doesn't really mean that these things are technically non-rewearables. So non-rewearables are not always dirty or broken. They can be perfect t-shirts, but the thing is they don't have a value in the secondhand market. So also, the problem is a little bit bigger than people normally think, because everyone will think, non-rewearable, who puts broken trousers in these collection bins. It could be still okay products, but yeah, simply don't have a value on the market. And indeed, so if nothing else can be done with these products, then to consider recycling. And I think here, this is really where the cities, they play a very important role. So one of the things they can do is ensure that the collection mechanisms that they have are actually, are the right ones, so that you're able to collect these textiles to ensure that they stay clean, and then to sort, to have the sorting facilities in your organization. And talking from the European perspective and the Dutch perspective, what has gone wrong here in the past years really is that we have only been focusing on collection rates. So success has been, we collect as many used textiles as possible, and then, yeah, we're doing the right thing. Problem is, we, as you called it, we offloaded our externalities, because what happened, we exported 70% of all the textiles that have been collected. I have some bad news, because as you might know, the US is #1 exporter of used textiles in the world. Your export of used textiles even doubled in the past 10 years. So I think you're kind of facing a similar challenge. But then to really assess how could you bring this infrastructure for sorting and recycling on your own grounds, I think is a very valuable one. Not only does it make sense from an environmental perspective, but you can also see whether there's a social return of these activities. And there are cities actually that have changed their ways of working, so that we really have shifted from just focusing on collecting as many used textiles as I possibly can, to actually see, okay, maybe these volumes are not the most important thing. Maybe the most important thing is that we actually are able to valorize these textiles.
So yeah, so you're saying reuse, repurpose as long as possible. There's a lot of business and a lot of creativity that can be put into the upcycling market, a lot of creative brands out there. But a non-stained, non-holy white t-shirt that just won't sell, that's considered a non-rewearable, right? Because there's so many of these like free giveaway t-shirts out there that say, I went to this summer camp in 1998, right? And so nobody's gonna buy that.
No, you're not even allowed to sell those. So for my initiative in Rotterdam, for instance, I dealt with lots of textiles collected at the start of a marathon. And actually loads of those textiles, you're not allowed to sell them anymore, because there's a personalized print on it.
Sure. So collecting, like you said, we're globally, perhaps the conversation and success is being measured in how much are we collecting. So that's of course step #1. That's good. We have to collect it. But then the challenge after that becomes, it's kind of a big brick wall right now of sorting and seeing like maybe if there was some warehouse somewhere, let's say in like East Downtown LA or something, where all these textiles were collected and then dumped, perhaps like the industry could be allowed to come in if you sort it from the rewearables to the non-rewearables. Maybe the industry itself can come in, sift through those rewearables, see what they can do to repurpose, to upcycle, pay a small cost for that. And then the non-rewearables though, then that's what needs to get sent to the mechanical recyclers and the brand new technologies that are on the market, just barely the chemical recycling, which should be the textile recycling. And there's a few companies, there's a handful of companies worldwide who are doing this. One of them is actually here in Los Angeles, and we're very proud of that. Their name is Ambercycle. There's another one in Seattle called Evernew. Hilda, you guys are partnered with Warn Again. They focus on doing blends, I think. And then there's another one out of Sweden called RenewCell. They do blends, or I think maybe cotton, so chemical cotton fiber. But these exciting new textiles are, so spring 2020 should be a big like breakout year for these recycled textile recycled materials, because I think a lot of these companies are going to launch their first of these products in spring of next year. and that's great, but is that going to be enough to serve the fashion industry? No, because the industry needs like all sorts of weights and styles and wovens and knits and textures. So just like a couple recycled textiles, that's not enough to serve the industry. We need to incentivize these types of companies to have more of these types of companies. And, you know, because then we'll have more variety of textiles to choose from. And one thing I did wanted to bring up for Los Angeles, I know the pre-consumer waste for scraps when on the cutting floor, collecting the scraps, you know, and that production clothing waste. That in Los Angeles is kind of what is being asked about the most right now. And supposedly we all keep hearing that there is a solution on its way. There's definitely some companies in New York like Fab Scrap who goes around and collects all the scraps from the industry. We don't have one of those service providers here in Los Angeles yet. Every brand I talk to, we're all kind of asking like, how do we do this? How do we collect? How do we recycle these scraps? And that's just like one part of the problem, but either Clay or Andy, do either of you know anything about on the city level if a hauler or a company to pick up these fashion industry cuttings and scraps is on the way, or what's that small solution in Los Angeles? Clay, do you want to talk, or maybe Andy on that? Go ahead.
Go ahead. I've heard, I was at a fashion conference last year and I met Fab Scrap there. I think they're exploring a move to open up a location in Los Angeles, but I haven't heard anything since then. Andy, have you heard anything about what trash haulers could do?
Well, I'll tell you the entire system that we have in place right now, according to LA Sanitation, is we're testing a pilot process where there are drop-off boxes throughout the city. They're going to pass out some bags to residential customers, and nonprofit will go around and pick up those bags. And that's pretty much the entire Los Angeles textile recycling system. We're really at the beginning of this conversation.
We've had a really nice question from the audience. Amy would like to know from Hilda, in light of what Andy's just said, what kind of startups we're starting to see in the clothing and fashion value chain that are trying to solve these problems about the collection of clothing, how they get reused, and maybe some examples that you've seen from the work that you've been doing.
Yeah. So I think, to name a few, I mean, it's really a growing industry, I would say. So, but maybe here what I especially then actually want to answer, it might be a different answer than expected. But what we are facing currently, and that's why I'm very happy also what you just said, Andy, while we have many initiatives are out there that aim to reuse garments, to refurbish them or to recycle them, and Carrie already mentioned quite a few of the upcoming recycling technologies. And let's not forget that actually there are also mature recycling technologies. You are already able to recycle mechanically cotton or wool, for instance. So it's not like we have to start from scratch. But what we see currently is that there is no business case, talking really from the European perspective here, but I'm pretty sure it will be comparable in the US. There's no business case to collect more of these textiles simply because they don't currently flow back into the textiles chain. And actually there is an analysis that has been done by the MacArthur Foundation that currently less than 1% of textiles is actually being turned back into textiles later on. And that's really where cities actually play a very important role. And very often we all look at the industry, but actually the organizations dictating the conditions for everything that happens from a collector, sorter, and a recycler, those conditions are dictated by cities because they are responsible for the waste management. So if they, for instance, charge a fee for the right to collect used textiles, and that fee is quite high, that does imply that actually there's no margin to do anything with these textiles except to export them as soon as possible, take out the rewearable high value stuff and export them as soon as possible, rather than to actually sort them on your own grounds and find the right solution for it. So even though that we have this booming, growing field of very promising and interesting startups to valorize these used textiles, if we don't, if governments don't really look at them as such, and don't really assess the incentives that they currently create at the end of the textiles chain, then it will be quite difficult to ensure that these textiles flow back through all these promising initiatives. I hope this answers Amy's question a bit.
Yeah, thank you, Hilda. I then kind of wonder on the back of that, maybe Andy or Clay, if you could talk about maybe the role of policy interventions that you see that might be possible by one of the largest cities in the world, like the city of Los Angeles. If you see the city playing a role there in policy level interventions and more than just waste collection infrastructure and things like that.
One of the things that we've really noted from the city of Los Angeles, the Guardian newspaper called Los Angeles the #1 most influential city in the world a couple of years ago. And we've noticed that what happens in Los Angeles doesn't stay in Los Angeles, it flows around the world. After we got the plastic bag ban done, just for one example, we got calls from New Zealand and South Korea within about an hour asking how we did it and how they could move forward with doing it. I apologize with the sirens in the background. So for the city of Los Angeles to really start to look at the whole life cycle of this industry, I think is a really important step. And once Los Angeles does it, then the state of California does it. And once California does it, as we know, California is starting to become one of the climate leaders since we don't have any federal leadership. So if California does it, then the rest of the world can be watching and we can hopefully have a positive impact that way. So Councilmember Koretz is very interested in introducing legislation to begin the conversation. You know, obviously we're not too far along in this particular realm, and this conversation will help move us forward. And then Councilmember Koretz, this is how the legislation works. Councilmember introduces legislation, gets assigned to a committee, and then we ask the Chief Legislative Analyst Office to go off and examine, you know, what the industry is doing and what the city departments are doing, and that's when it goes over to Clay, and maybe Clay can take it from there.
Yeah, so I don't work on sanitation issues specifically, but yeah, my office, we have a sanitation analyst who, yeah, so on the sanitation side, we're the ones that work with the council office and then try and get the departments together, research the issue, and then come up with a set of recommendations to carry forward the policy. So yeah, as Andy said, we are very early on in these conversations, but that's very exciting.
Clay, can you talk a little bit about on your report that you just finished, ways that you were recommending the city could incentivize the industry economically? Because I know you're focusing on the economics and not the environmental side.
That's right. It's more, yes, we don't mention sustainability, and it was a economic study of the industry. But one of the big challenges is encouraging fashion buyers to visit Los Angeles and then buy and then to choose which lines to put into their stores. So LA is competing obviously with New York City, but also there are emerging fashion centers in Dallas, Las Vegas, and San Francisco. So one of the main challenges is encouraging fashion buyers to come to Los Angeles from around the country. And the fashion district, there's some concerns about lack of affordable hotel rooms, lack of parking, perception that the neighborhood is not safe. So the CLA's report offers recommendations to try and green the district, to try and plant some more street trees and put some lighting in there to try and just make a more hospitable environment for business to happen. And the other challenge is the industry is a little bit fragmented. There's no one industry champion who is speaking on behalf of the entire industry and marketing the variety of fashion weeks that we have. We actually have 5 fashion week conventions every year, but they're very fragmented. So that's the other thing. And so we're working with the industry to try and get them some marketing assistance to have one voice.
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the power that city governments have to convene stakeholders and to align actors within value chains to a particular set of circular economy goals. So I think that would be really, really powerful from the city. Carrie, we've also had a question from someone who's interested in the role of design. And I wondered if maybe from your experience, and maybe Hilda, you might also have some experience that you'd like to also include here about the design community in Los Angeles. If we talk about policy interventions in terms of waste, the management of textile and clothing waste, but also is there a role here in the city of Los Angeles about the way that clothing is designed so that it's ready for a next life, it's ready to be reused, it can be recycled. And if the design community in Los Angeles is ready and open to something like that, and if there would be particular support measures that maybe they needed to get going.
Yeah, I actually just had an event and a conversation talking about this on Friday, that the taking back and recycling, disassembling your product should be a thought process of the design process. You should design in order to take back, and that's kind of part of like the whole, all manufacturers should be responsible for their products once it gets into the market, and that's a big thing that doesn't happen globally. Like the paper cup just gets thrown away, and it's not the manufacturer's job to figure out what happens to that. But with fashion, because also like rental models and take back systems are new profit drivers, where you can rent one piece of clothing to many people a number of times, so it becomes a multi-use instead of a single sale product. That I think is a profit driver for the industry, to think about creating higher quality clothes that can be worn across a number of people for a longer period of time, instead of just selling it once, sitting in the closet and then hoping for the best. And I see Andy had a comment on this too, wants to jump in.
Yeah, I would, in terms of design, one of the things we also try to look at when we're solving the problems with for instance, what do we do with leftover textiles, is one of the other big problems that's come up recently is the problem of microfibers, which are showing up in our water system. And a lot of the microfibers are coming from the great Patagonia sweaters that I certainly have several, and a very environmentally conscious company suddenly realizes that every time you wash one of those, thousands of microfibers end up in the water, and it's difficult to get those out in the wastewater treatment process. So as we're looking at redesign, we also need to think about the other problems that we're solving for, and that's certainly one of them.
I'm glad you brought up the microfibers. I know that we don't have a ton of time left, and I would love to go into that. I wanted to see, kind of maybe wrapping it up, Hilda, if there were, some more specific like policy recommendations based on your study that you can share that might be helpful for the group.
Yes, of course. So of course, I just published a whole report on it, so I would definitely advise you to read it for full details, but to give you the very short summary of it. So as I already mentioned, do not underestimate the importance of collection, so ensuring the right collection methods are being used, but also educating your own citizens in how to dispose of your textiles. So that's actually quite important to ensure the quality of whatever you collect. Then really map the different textile streams that you have within your city, their composition, and then the infrastructure you currently have for the valorization of these textiles, and then what additional things you might need. Another more direct one is actually one that the city can do quite easily, is procure, you procure your own textile products as well. So ask for a recycled content to be used in those. That's really a very important pool for the whole industry to start using recycled content. And then for Los Angeles specifically, I know that your mayor is the chair-elect of the C40 network. So the and it's a network of the world's mega cities committed to addressing climate change. But what I noticed in the report, it was called the headline report that was published. And one very good thing is textiles were mentioned in the headline report, but not the whole life cycle of this industry. So it only focuses on the production side to assess the climate impact of this industry. So I think that's also definitely my message or my wish for the city of Los Angeles, while you are now in this influential position, to also ensure that we start looking at not only the impact of textile production, but actually also at the impact of the textiles after their first use.
So that would be like the microfibers and the washing. Is that kind of what you're getting into?
And the reuse and so everything that you want to do afterwards. So also, if you look at your current textiles industry, I mean, a big part of the textiles that are being disposed of currently are being landfilled. I think was already mentioned earlier on in this call. That also has quite a very big environmental impact. And then these textiles are either landfilled in your own country, or might be exported and landfilled somewhere else. So to really more and more assess the impact of the full chain. So really also looking at really from the start of the product to the end of the product to assess the full life cycle.
So as our next step, the way that the mayor's Green New Deal sort of works with the city council, the mayor has set a tremendous number of goals, as Carrie Ann mentioned, and then it often the mayor's office will partner with the city council member to introduce legislation to further that goal. So with this goal, maybe the team on this conference call can work on the motion that we can introduce in Los Angeles to make sure that we hit all these important comments about life cycle analysis, and certainly we need to, as a whole society, stop offloading business costs onto government, because then government gets more costly. People don't want to pay for government, but they don't see the connection between the clothes that they're wearing and the taxes that they're paying to pay for landfills, or to pay for carting of textiles, or for the greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. So so I hope that can be a good partnership and a good way that we can move forward with this conversation and these introductions with everybody here today.
That certainly sounds like something really exciting and a really good point, I think, to end the session on. Thank you so much, Carrie, Andy, Hilda, and Clay, for all of the insight and experience that you've brought to the session. I think it's been really, really useful to hear a bit about how the policy process works in Los Angeles, and to get some really great policy recommendations from Hilda as well. So thank you very much. And thank you, Carrie, for convening this really, really great panel of speakers to discuss this topic about Los Angeles becoming a circular fashion hub. There is still a lot more exciting sessions happening this week on the DIF, particularly around the topic of fashion. I know there are 2 sessions tomorrow. There's one on Thursday, and the last session as well on Friday is also around the topic of fashion and the circular economy. So if you're interested in fashion and the circular economy, please do tune in for some of those sessions as well. We'll be further unpacking some of these business model ideas and the role that cities can play in making fashion circular in their cities. If you've been listening to us online and if you listen to this afterwards, please do continue to add your comments to the comments box and questions. We'd love to keep hearing back from you. Thank you so much for joining us and keep enjoying the DIF. Thanks, everyone.